And we're back! Last time I told you about my journey to watching The Hobbit. This time I will tell you my journey to recutting The Hobbit. This is not the first time I have recut the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. In fact, the first time I made a fan edit, I was 16 years old and using a DVD player and a VCR, playing the DVD player and recording the VCR, I created the Lazy Boy edition of Lord of the Rings. Hold on, I actually have this. I have it somewhere. I'll be back. Knew I had it. Here it is. The Lord of the Rings Lazy Boy cut. Don't watch if you're wanting good editing. So it's a solid disclaimer. And the Lord of the Rings. And this cut the entire trilogy down to one 3-hour movie. And it mostly made sense. I first recut The Hobbit on Windows Movie Maker in 2014. I was using that program long past its sell-by date. Fun fact, I actually stopped using Windows Movie Maker in January 2021 when it died on me. So yeah, all of the Man series, except for anything produced in 2021, was all edited on Windows Movie Maker. Ugh, boy. I'm now using Adobe Premiere, in fairness. First, I did a book cut to see what that would look like. In fact, I remember watching film 3 for the very first time in the cinema, and seeing the death of Smaug and thinking, oh, this is great. I can see how I can recut this to make it look like Bard has fired the black arrow from his regular bow. Which I did. I then later recut it into 2 films, and even as rough as it was done on Windows Movie Maker, I could see it working as 2 better films. In 2017, I cut it again using Adobe Premiere because I was growing up and stuff, which allowed for much smoother sound transitions. While I was in Los Angeles in 2017, I was actually able to go on Torn Tuesday with OneRing.net and talk about it. In 2020, Torn Tuesday did a great series of audio commentaries with Doug Adams and Jim Ware about the music of The Hobbit, in which they pointed out the presence of alternate tracks for certain scenes, and also the intention of the Gandalf in the High Fells scene being after Rivendell instead of after he leaves the company at Mirkwood, having him cross the Misty Mountains 4 times during this trilogy. These new clues got me thinking, and the desire to once again get cracking and cutting at The Hobbit came. And just after Christmas 2020, because we had nothing better to do in this pandemic, I thought I'd treat myself to do a little editing for fun, as opposed to the other editing I do for work, which can be fun. My 2-movie cut is built on the principle of what the writers and director had originally intended when it was just going to be 2 films, as far as I can surmise. Radagast and the Bunny Sled are still in this cut. Tauriel is still very much in this cut, as it is evident that these were always going to be key components of the 2 films. I have trimmed certain action sequences for pacing reasons, and I have tried to keep my own opinions on certain aspects of these films out of the cut, for the most part. But occasionally I have made my own editorial choices here and there.
Yes.
It's gonna happen. In this video, I will outline the key changes in this cut of the two films. Please note that when I say a section has remained uncut, I am using the theatrical cuts as a basis. Some extended scenes have made their way into this duology cut, but I will specify when they pop up. Keep in mind, I was only able to work with what I was given. I'm sure there are certain better, more suitable alternative takes or versions of certain scenes, and maybe if Warner Brothers are willing to give Zack Snyder a shot at recutting his Justice League movie, maybe Peach could do a 2-movie cut? Or at least, like, release the deleted scenes so I can use them a little bit more? We'll see. The running times of each film comes in around 3.5 hours, making each longer than the theatrical cut of Return of the King, but shorter than the extended Fellowship of the Ring, so it's a happy medium in my opinion. These are aimed to be theatrical cuts, otherwise I would just include most of the scenes. Film 1, An Unexpected Journey. The film remains relatively uncut throughout the prologue. I snipped a little "Oh, Frodo" from Bilbo's Erebor line. Also, Smaug's correct front feet from the extended edition are in this cut. The unexpected party is tidied up a little bit. The discussion around the table is streamlined a little too, taking out the kerfuffle of "how many dragons have you killed?" and instead have the kerfuffle about Balin suggesting some dwarves aren't the brightest.
Well, we number just 13. Not 13 of the best. Nor brightest.
Here! Who are you calling in? Please.
The brief scene between Thorin and Balin in Bag End is cut for pacing. Once Bilbo joins the company and Gandalf gives him the "home is behind you, the world is ahead" speech, we cut straight to the arrival at the old homestead leading into the troll sequence, cutting out the Azog backstory and introduction of Radagast. After the Troll Cave, Radagast's arrival and introduction is extended. Rather than Radagast explaining to Gandalf how the Greenwood is sick, we get a flashback to him seeing the Greenwood being sick. Show, don't tell. Finding Sebastian, trying to save him, etc. The spiders climbing on the house is cut for pacing, so Sebastian does actually die in this cut, unfortunately. But Radagast runs out to see spiders. Cut to Radagast talking about spiders to Gandalf, and we continue into the Dol Guldur flashback. This Mirkwood sequence works better as one sequence rather than two scenes broken up. Also, I cut the stick insect. It is a silly place. The Warg chase is trimmed for pacing. Rivendell remains mostly uncut as of the theatrical cut. The Amon Sul scene sees our introduction of Azog in this cut. This is a much stronger introduction of the character, in my opinion. He is mysterious, intimidating, and nameless. All we know about him is that he is hunting Thorin and the company, and that is all we need to know for now. The White Council scene is trimmed. Galadriel talking about the Witch King's burial includes the flashback featured in the extended edition of Desolation of Smaug. Saruman's unnecessary recap of what we have just been listening to is gone. Keep the ball rolling. Gandalf's later scene with Galadriel is rescored, here using the original score. In the final cut, they used music from Fellowship of the Ring, from the "all you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you" scene. But that music is so reified, intrinsically linked to that scene, in my opinion, that it distracts from the new moment. The new score actually works better and fits perfectly with the cut, showing it may have been ditched at a late stage.
Why the halfling?
I do not know. Saruman believes that it is only a great power that can hold evil in check. But that is not what I found. I found it is the small things, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keeps the darkness at bay. Simple acts of kindness and love. Why, Bilbo Baggins? Perhaps it is because I'm afraid. And it gives me courage.
Mithrandir. Why the halfling?
I do not know. Saruman believes that it is only a great power that can hold evil in check. But that is not what I found. I found it is the small things, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keeps the darkness at bay. Simple acts of kindness and love. Why, Bilbo Baggins? Perhaps it is because I'm afraid. And it gives me courage.
And just as a note on the score in general, I really wish they had included more of Bilbo's theme. It was a strong and iconic theme which continues to get stuck in my head. It's understandable why they went with more of a general Shire theme for Bilbo, but I wish they would have trusted the new material more. I've also included Galadriel's instruction sending Gandalf to the High Fells here too, taken from The Edge of Mirkwood. The Stone Giants sequence is trimmed for pacing. As the dwarves settle into the caves, Balin mentions that they were supposed to wait for Gandalf. Plans change. It is here that we cut to Gandalf and his journey to the High Fells, as was originally intended. When Radagast shows up, I reinstated Gandalf's original line, "Oh, you," as opposed to "Oh, it's you," as we've already met Radagast in this film. This scene was previewed in a special online event hosted by Peter Jackson in March 2013. The scene had a longer ending to it, as Gandalf noted that the cells were broken from the inside. I was unable to salvage this. The following scene with Gandalf and Radagast probably exists from pickups to work into film 2. I've removed any references to Azog here. The inclusion of this scene here adds tension to whether or not Gandalf will show up with the dwarves later. The Great Goblin's mention of Azog by name are cut. We only hear him referred to as the Pale Orc. Thorin remains unaware of Azog, and indeed the audience remains unaware of their history. Riddles in the Dark remains untouched. It's practically perfect. The Goblin Town escape is trimmed for pacing. Because of the extension into a trilogy, it's very possible that these action sequences weren't meant to go on as long as they did, but with the space made by a trilogy, perhaps elements that would have been cut and put back in an extended edition made it into the theatrical cut itself. In Out of the Frying Pan into the Fire, when Thorin sees Azog for the first time, the audience realises that they know each other and that they have a grudge. A brief insert of Azog holding aloft Thror's head is seen to hint at the history, upping the stakes considerably. Whereas before, when they first met, you were like, oh yeah, Thorin finally realises that Azog is alive. Whereas now you're like, wait a minute, they know each other? And they've got beef? It's so much better. When Thorin arises to run at Azog, the out-of-place Ringwraith music is replaced with music from the original score, which is much more dwarvish in sound and reflects more on the conflict between Thorin and Azog. interesting, the deleted music which follows suggests an entirely different sequence, which makes sense as Bilbo rugby tackling the orc was added later, in order to push forward his character arc of proving his worth to Thorin for the 3-film structure. Bilbo's rescue of Thorin from Azog and the orcs is indeed cut. The eagles arrive much sooner. In the 3-film structure, the sequence of the eagles flying over the mountains is scored to be very much towards the end of a movie. It's slow, it's winding down, it's catching the breath after the climax. There's a completely different score to this, which went unused, which has much better pace for moving from Act 2 to Act 3. It may not be synced as well because this sequence would probably look quite different in a 2-movie cut, but what is wonderfully intriguing about the unused music is the reprise of the opening motif, which melded the Rings theme with the theme of Durin's folk. Howard Shore did this twice in Lord of the Rings, where he reprised the opening score as the film moves into Act 3. It sort of bookends the score, refreshing the audience and preparing them for the dive towards the 3rd act. The scene atop the Carrack is chopped a bit. Thorin's reconciliation with Bilbo has been transplanted to later in the film. Because of this, the editing is a bit choppy here. I did what I could. I'm sure a completely different version of this scene exists in the vaults. The scene of Beorn watching Azog atop the mountains does not include Bilbo watching him in this cut, to try and soften the transition between what became An Unexpected Journey and Desolation of Smaug in the trilogy structure. The scene of Gandalf telling the company about Beorn's house, for example, was quite clearly shot and written as an opening to a film, as it introduces certain details. I have recut the perfect burglar material, for example. The film needs to move. It does feel clumsy here, and I'm sure there is a better version somewhere in the Wingnut archives that was shot when it was just 2 films. The scene of Bolg meeting Azog in the woods is included, but if I could change more in this film, this scene would be cut. It is clear that it was originally meant to be Azog who shows up at the barrel sequence in Mirkwood later. He featured in the first Desolation of Smaug trailer, and it makes more sense for our chief antagonist so far to follow them all the way to the end of film 1, sort of like Lurtz in Fellowship of the Ring. When the film became a trilogy, Azog was needed in Dol Guldur earlier, so a newly designed CGI Bolg took his place in Desolation of Smaug. I could only work with what I had on screen, unfortunately, otherwise Azog would be here. The shot of Bilbo playing with the ring in Beorn's house is cut too. The Dol Guldur scene has been transplanted to later. During the breakfast scene in Beorn's house, the backstory of Azog is given. This is where the writers had originally intended to reveal this story, according to Philippa Boyens in the audio commentary. Beorn had a much stronger link with the Azog and Dol Guldur story too, which got greatly cut out. I intercut shots of Balin standing by the campfire from the scene in An Unexpected Journey. In Beorn's house, you can actually see Balin standing by the fireplace, and it is quite possible that he may have told the same story standing by that fireplace instead. Some basic special effects work could put Beorn's house as a background into the shots of Balin, but I have neither the time nor the patience to do that. Anyone good with background replacement? Please send me a DM. As the company are preparing to leave Beorn's house, part of the extended scene between Beorn and Gandalf was put back in. It matches the pacing of where it lies in the film and adds to the Dol Guldur storyline. As they ride off, the scene of Azog arriving in Dol Guldur is put into here. As aforementioned, this is a scene which would have been better suited for the start of the second film, but I wanted my cut to make sense. Thus, Azog needed the reason to not be at the climax. In a 2-movie cut, he should and would have been there. As the company get ready to enter Mirkwood, Gandalf finds the marking of the eye, but as well as hearing Galadriel, he also hears Radagast. If what you say is true, the world is in grave danger. Thus spurring him on to leave the company and go directly to Dol Guldur. The Lost in Mirkwood sequence remains uncut as of the theatrical cut. It's very good and super trippy. The spider sequence is trimmed mainly with Bilbo viciously attacking the strange bug over the ring, which feels a little out of place. I don't like what it does to Bilbo's character at this point of the story. I've actually removed a lot of ring-heavy stuff. It's not a part of the Hobbit story and is much more subtle in this version. His naming of Sting here is a lovely payoff to the gag set up earlier in this film. Most of the flirtations between Kili and Tauriel are kept in, as it would seem this romance was always intended by the writers. I have trimmed out her "oh nothing" response to "I could have anything down my trousers." It's slicker and it makes Tauriel look like she really does not take any nonsense.
Aren't you going to search me? I could have anything down my trousers.
The love triangle with Legolas, however, I don't think was originally intended in the 2-movie structure, so much of those interactions are cut. Legolas in general has been relegated to a supporting character in this cut. The moment where Bilbo thinks he's spotted by Thranduil briefly, "I know you're there. Why do you linger in the shadows?" remains, but as Tauriel enters, the scene cuts away, leaving the focus on Bilbo. The barrel escape sequence remains pretty much uncut. This is another example of how a scene is scored differently depending on where it lies in the film. Had this have been at the climax of the film, the music most certainly would have reflected this much more. As the sequence ends and the dwarves have escaped, we cut to Gandalf and Radagast arriving at Dol Guldur. As Gandalf says, "It is undoubtedly a trap," heroically unsheaths his sword and walks in. We cut away. This is the cliffhanger end of Gandalf's story of film 1. We cut back to the dwarves washing up on the shore, intercut with Thorin and Bilbo's reconciliation atop the Carrack. Shots of Gandalf are replaced with shots of Balin. I am convinced that a very similar scene to this exists here between Thorin and Bilbo, so I have clumsily edited here to mark the end of their story arc of this film. Peter Jackson, if you want to send me that original scene, do me a favour, it'd be great. The story arc of Bilbo earning Thorin's trust and respect climaxes here, as it does in the book. The dark silhouette of Bard shows up, never fully revealed, fires a few arrows.
Do it again, and you're dead.
The music swells. It's actually music from film 3 that worked a treat here. And we cut to the final sequence of the Lonely Mountain. This cliffhanger ending with Bard was spoken about by the writers, and it explains why Bard is not clearly seen in those earlier shots. And inside, the Eye of Smaug, waking up as film 1 was always meant to close with. Finally, I included I See Fire by Ed Sheeran, as it is a much better song to close film 1 with, even if it probably wouldn't have existed had it been for the 3-film structure. Song of the Lonely Mountain by Neil Finn comes after. A lot of people often wonder why they stopped using the Fire Over the Misty Mountains theme after film 1. It was an odd choice, as it very much seemed to be the Fellowship theme of The Hobbit. You know, when you think of the Fellowship, you think dun 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 da da da, and literally that mirrored sequence of the Fellowship coming over the hill, bum 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 bum, as they're going over the hill. There is that same sequence in The Hobbit with dum 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 dum. So that theme felt very much like a Fellowship theme, and then it gets dropped completely. Films 2 and 3 would focus more on Durin's folk theme, which is da 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 da. See, I can't even sing it properly. La 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 la. I can't. I mean, I can sing basically any theme from Lord of the Rings and most of the themes from The Hobbit, like do 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 do. Like, that's the, which one is that? Dun, 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 dun. Oh, that's the Warg theme. Dum bum bum bum, which I always genuinely think sounds like where there's a whip, whoosh, there's a way. Anyway, but yeah, so the official reason for why they dropped the Misty Mountains theme was, fair enough, because the company had passed the Misty Mountains. That theme was now redundant, which is a fair explanation. However, I have a tinfoil hat theory. So, the Misty Mountains song tune was written by Plan 9, a group who writes a lot of the in-universe folk music for these films. Howard Shore incorporated that tune into his score, becoming one of the most prominent themes of film 1. I think if it was used in films 2 and 3, Plan 9 may have had to be paid royalties of some kind, and the studios just didn't want to do this. Again, this is complete speculation. I haven't a clue, but it does seem strange that a film score would drop one of its strongest and most recognizable themes completely, particularly when it is intrinsically linked to the company. You know, have your Durin's folk theme for the more regal moments, but that specifically the company of Thorin Oakenshield, that is far over the misty mountains cold. Like, that is them. You know? Anyway, when the credits roll, it's 3 hours and 16 minutes. By the end of the credits, the running time is 3 hours and 27 minutes, making it longer than the theatrical cut of Return of the King and shorter than the extended Fellowship of the Ring. It is still too long, and if given the full range of shot choices, sound mixes, and musical options, this could probably have another 10 minutes shaved off. Film 2. There and Back Again. Film 2 opens with the Bree flashback scene from Desolation of Smaug. This is probably not how Film 2 was originally meant to open, as the writers did mention that the Bree sequence only came about after the 3-movie structure was decided upon. But seeing as it is the only natural scene to seamlessly open the film with, I left it in. I also included part of the flashback of the Battle of Moria from the extended cut to help set up and re-establish Thorin and Azog's grudge, as well as Thrain, who will later be included in this cut. The subplot about the Dwarvish Ring, however, remains cut. There's enough story threads in this film. I used the same transition of "that's why we're going to need a burglar" to bring us back to the main story, only to use a shot of Bilbo aboard Bard's boat, thus continuing that story and introducing Bard and resolving the cliffhanger from the previous film. As they approach the first area with guards, we cut to the orcs tracking the company, reintroducing the orcs to film 2. It's quite possible that Azog, having been present at the climax of film 1, would have been summoned to Dol Guldur at this point. We then cut back to the barrels getting filled with fish and the whole sequence entering the toll gate at Laketown and the introduction of Alfred. It's as they approach the toll gate that we see our new film title, There and Back Again. The original title of film 2. The placing of this title here makes sense and was hinted at during one of the behind the scenes documentaries. As the dwarves walk through Laketown, the extended moment of Thorin saying, "This Master Baggins is the world of men," is included. It acts as an introduction to the audience and suits the beginning of a film. The Laketown scenes run fairly uncut as the theatrical cut until Bard recognises Thorin's name and leaves to look into it. After he leaves, we cut to Thranduil, Legolas and Tauriel interrogating a captured orc. The audience is reminded of Kili getting hit by a Morgul shaft with a quick flashback shot. After Tauriel leaves and Legolas follows, we cut to Dol Guldur, where we are reintroduced to Gandalf and Azog listening from underneath. It is here that it can become evident that this was shot as a very different storyline to what it became in the final cut. A real-life Azog, played by Conan Stevens, would have been present here. When Azog's design changed to appear more like Yazneg, ultimately looked like Conan Stevens' Azog was renamed Bolg. Ultimately, both designs were scrapped, as was a lot of the original storyline. I explained this in part 1. We then cut to Tauriel and Legolas tracking the orcs by the river. Some of the dialogue has been trimmed just for tidiness. We then cut back to Bard in Laketown learning about the prophecy. The film plays uncut through the dwarves' capture and scene in front of the mayor's house. The extended moment of Bilbo vouching for Thorin is included as it will be directly referenced later in this film. We cut to Gandalf finding Thrain. This sequence came from the extended edition, but was part of the original plan given its inclusion in the earliest trailer. Yes, it may well have been cut later, but in this cut it actually helps add tension. Again, any references to the Rings of Power, they were cut. There's no space. Thrain's line, "Thorin must not enter that mountain," works really well, cutting to the dwarves heading to the mountain. We continue all the way up to the dwarves reaching the overlook. Cuts to The Shining. After the dwarves talk about Gandalf on the overlook, we're back to Gandalf and Thrain being confronted by Azog, and indeed the reveal of the legions and Sauron. We cut back to the dwarves searching for and finding the secret door and entering in. Gandalf's capture in Desolation of Smaug would have appeared here, but because it was moved earlier, Bilbo goes straight down into the treasure room for his face-off with Smaug. This is actually much better for the pacing. The initial Smaug sequence remains uncut, but as it begins to drag, I trim it along with a cutaway to Gandalf in a cage that's transplanted to later. Bard revealing the Black Arrow to his family, his capture, the orc attack on the house, they remain uncut. I've included the moment of Bilbo grabbing the Arkenstone here at the end of this scene, removing any ambiguity of whether or not he has it. That ambiguity worked in the 3 films, but not so much in the 2. After Thorin's confrontation with Bilbo and Smaug chasing the dwarves into an archway, we cut to Tauriel's healing of Kili. Kili's ramblings to Tauriel afterwards is trimmed to not include, "Do you think she could have loved me?" This storyline seems much more genuine if they're not proclaiming their undying love for each other after barely hours of knowing each other. It's more like a, in any other time, any other place, if given the space, these two may have been able to blossom. But alas, they meet in the middle of a brewing war. The entire complicated sequence of dwarves trying to kill Smaug and Legolas's showdown with Bolg are cut for time and pacing. The dwarven fight with Smaug was only put in there because the 3-movie structure needed an action climax for film 2. We then cut to Bilbo's final confrontation with Smaug before Smaug decides to leave for Lake Town. It cuts directly to Smaug breaking out of the front gate and taking flight. Unfortunately, the fact that he is covered in flakes of gold is unexplained in this cut, but again, if I could, I would. Instead of cutting to black after the final "what have we done" line of Desolation of Smaug, we cut to an abandoned Dol Guldur and caged Gandalf, seeing the legions leaving for war. We cut back to Smaug's destruction of Laketown and his death, which all remain pretty much uncut. After Bilbo announces Smaug is dead, we cut to an edited, extended sequence of Big Beardy Azog abusing Gandalf, and the arrival of the White Council and banishment of Sauron. Radagast giving Gandalf his staff is included. It is evident in call sheets that Beorn was originally in this scene, and indeed a prisoner in Dol Guldur with Gandalf. There is much of this subplot that remains a mystery regarding what was originally intended. # release the duology cut! We cut back to the chaotic shoreline of Laketown. Some shots of Alfred are cut to reduce his ridiculousness. When the dwarves are reunited and Bilbo warns of Thorin's sickness, I've cut "he's been down there for days" and reference to dragon sickness because A, he's been down there a few hours, max, and B, greed is a better thing to suffer from than dragon sickness. I haven't cut all dragon sickness references, but it's not a thing in this cut, you know? The quiet scene with Bilbo revealing he has the Arkenstone to the audience is greatly reduced to a reminder shot or two, as we've already seen it. Alfred's comments about the mountain to Bard are cut. Alfred is not a main character in this film. Any reference of Tauriel being banished from Mirkwood is cut. Tauriel simply joins Legolas to Gundabad. Much of the arrival of men and elves to Dale remains fairly uncut, as does the dwarves' preparation and negotiations between Bard and Thorin. Legolas's backstory about his mother and Angmar are cut. Legolas and Thranduil are reduced to supporting roles in these films, and their character arcs are greatly reduced. The extended scene between Bilbo and Bofur is included to echo the similar scene in the mountain cave in film 1. I love this scene. The performances and what's not said is just so good. Alfred's involvement with Bilbo's sleeping arrangements is cut. We assume Bilbo sneaks back. You don't have to tell us everything. The drama at the wall regarding the Arkenstone remains uncut. Everything of what was film 3 up until this point was mostly shot during principal photography, and thus probably existed within the 2-movie structure. I will say this part is a bit flabby and could probably be trimmed even more between the death of Smaug and the beginning of the Battle of the Five Armies. It's a bit flabby. Could snip it a bit more. But again, I'm limited by sound mixes and music. The battle that follows was shot and much was written with the knowledge that it would be a 3rd film. Thus, the battle sequence is probably a lot more complex than it would have been written and shot to be the end of a 2nd film. This made the sequence somewhat difficult to streamline, and yet at the same time, it was quite easy. The intricacies of what I cut from the battle is not going to be detailed here. There's just so much chopping and changing. The simpler dwarf charge from the theatrical cut is used. The whole battle is streamlined to follow a much smoother narrative. Some extended shots of mounted Thranduil and Dane fighting are included, but Bard's heroics saving his family are cut. We know he's a hero. Alfred is gone from this final battle. The scene between Thorin and Dwalin is cut, as is the very blatant gold floor scene. Thorin's recovery is subtler in this cut. At the bleakest hour, Thorin simply emerges to fight and emboldens his men, having seen the error of his ways. Some of the extended sequences of Thorin's company were reinserted to give more focus on the dwarves, including the axe throwing sequence with a reprise of the Misty Mountains theme for a nice throwback to film 1. Disgusting and very un-Tolkien Stumpy troll remains cut as much as possible from this version. It fits more into Warhammer or Warcraft, but not The Hobbit. And again, this isn't anything on amputees. It's just a really cruel design, and I just cannot imagine J.R.R. Tolkien writing. And then the troll with huge flailing chain balls coming from his arm stumps, and he was blind, and chains attached to his eyelids allowed an orc upon his back to control him and steer him. Like, obviously Tolkien would have worded that much better than me, but it's just not Tolkien. Warcraft, yeah. Warhammer, absolutely. Not Tolkien. I reinstated the Dwarven chariot sequence with the removal of some of the gratuitous, gory violence. Sorry, Pete. And indeed, no Stumpy. This is a great little set piece, which is compelling and gives Balin an excellent hero moment. When the dwarves are on Ravenhill, I streamlined the editing to make it more like Philly gets caught amidst the chaos of battle, instead of the cumbersome, suicidal scouting mission. As Tauriel and Legolas approach Ravenhill, the focus remains on Tauriel and her going to save Kili. Legolas's bat acrobatics are cut, which leads to a much more exciting reveal later when he simply appears atop the tower to save Thorin. So much better. A lot of the action has been trimmed, characters killing 2 orcs instead of 3, just to keep it moving. Kili's death is quicker too, without Tauriel's rescue fake out. It's much more brutal here. If there is something I could change in the shoot, it would be Tauriel killing Bolg. It would have been a much more powerful conflict resolution, particularly because I cut Legolas's previous scuffle with Bolg. In a 2-movie cut, and indeed a 3, it makes more sense for Tauriel to avenge Kili, rather than becoming the damsel in distress at the last minute. But unfortunately, I had to work with what was in the film. So Legolas fights and kills Bolg. It's cut to not include his gravity-defying brick-hopping antics. It also doesn't intercut with Thorin's fight on the ice with Azog. Bolg is dead by the time that fight starts, giving all the focus to the final showdown on the ice. Beorn's extended shots are included also. Although there should be so much more Beorn in this battle. Some of the things they storyboarded was so cool. Thranduil's presence by Tauriel and his scene with Legolas are cut. Tauriel's "This is love, I do not want it" is cut. As she only met him a few days before. The Tauriel-Kili plotline works a lot better with more subtlety to their relationship. Thorin's funeral is included in this cut. The rest of the film remains uncut, as the epilogue is practically perfect in many ways. Gandalf and Bilbo's return was shot way back during principal photography and was always intended to be the end of the 2-film structure. When the credits roll, it's 3 hours and 20 minutes. And again, if I had more editorial flexibility, i.e. an entire editing and mixing suite, access to other footage, special effects team, etc., I could probably get these films into a leaner running time closer to Return of the King. They are still very long films, but their pacing is quite improved in some regards. So, the big question is, Do they work as two films? I may be biased. In fact, not maybe, I am completely biased. But, they are my cuts of the films. But I much prefer my duology cut to the Hobbit trilogy. The pacing is tidier for the most part. Although it does still hit a serious slump between the death of Smaug and the Battle of the Five Armies. Something that may have been remedied had it been cut as a second film. There are indeed many moments that are much more effective in the two-film structure as they work as companions to each other. Echoes, questions, answers, calls and responses. Tyrell and Keely's fleeting love is much more effective when treated as such and not complicated by a pointless contrived love interest from Legolas. The elves bookend film 1 nicely, seeing Thranduil during the prologue and indeed at the last hurdle of film 1. Bard's heroic arc is better contained within one film. If Azog had made it to the barrel sequence, it could have been a much more satisfying face-off between he and Thorin for the end of film 1. Thorin throwing the axe to save Legolas, mirrored by Legolas throwing Orcrist to save Thorin, works better when contained within the climax of both films. Overall, I think these films would have been better as two films. I think that because they hadn't the same time to prep the films, they didn't have the ability to tidy them up in pre-production. They weren't able to estimate that what they had planned to shoot would be way too long for two movies. So when left with what they shot, these films are going to be long and bloated in parts. In the end, it is amazing that these films turned out as well as they did. They didn't go full Phantom Menace and stand up amicably enough to their older, grander sibling, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Flawed, but honestly flawed, The Hobbit remains. Thanks again for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon. You can support my work on patreon.com/John D Ruddy, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Twitch. I'm on Twitch. You can check me out on Twitch. I'm probably going to be doing more live streams as the time goes on. But yeah, that was fun. And I'm literally only realizing now in the last 5 minutes that anytime I hit the table, I wobble the camera, which is why it may have looked like a slight earthquake earlier in the movie. Rumble, 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 rumble. But that's fine. We're all fine here now. Thank you. How are you?